Welcome to The Secret Case, where we explore the most shocking stories of organized crime and the most famous criminals in history. Today we delve into the life of one of the most iconic gangsters of the 20th century, Al Capone. Known as Scarface or Scarface, Capone was the king of crime in Chicago during the Prohibition era in the United States. He was responsible for running one of the most powerful and dangerous criminal networks of the time, while the police and the FBI struggled to end his reign of terror. If you're interested in stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more content about true crimes and the most feared characters in history. Hit the bell to not miss a single video. Alphonse Gabriel Capone was born on January 17, 1999 in Brooklyn, New York. His parents, Italian immigrants, settled in the United States seeking a better future for their children. From a young age, Capone showed an interest in power and influence. He was not a good student and was expelled from school at the age of 14 after beating up a teacher. From that time on, he began to get involved in petty criminal activities as a member of youth gangs in his neighborhood. During these years, Capone met Johnny Torrio, a prominent New York gangster who would become his mentor and a key figure in his rise in the world of organized crime. Torrio was a shrewd and experienced man who had learned the ropes in the violent underworld. He saw potential in Capone and taught him the skills necessary to operate on the dark side of society. Torrio's influence was crucial. He not only taught Capone about the bootlegging business, but also about the importance of establishing connections and alliances in the criminal world. These teachings became the basis for Capone's success in Chicago. In 1919, Torrio brought Capone to Chicago, where the criminal scene was flourishing, largely due to the prohibition of alcohol that went into effect in 1920. Prohibition, which banned the production, sale, and transportation of alcohol, created a huge demand on the black market. Torrio saw an opportunity, and Capone quickly learned how to take advantage of the illegal alcohol trade to make a fortune. After Torrio was wounded in an attack in 1925, Capone assumed full control of the operation and transformed the syndicate into a well-oiled criminal machine. Capone, with his charisma, knew how to buy off politicians, judges, and police officers. He also ran gambling houses, brothels, and other illegal businesses, always with a firm hand to eliminate any competitor who tried to challenge his empire. His success in the criminal world was not only due to his cunning and business skills, but also to his ability to establish an environment of loyalty and fear among his men. Capone understood that keeping his employees happy and well compensated was essential to avoiding betrayals and maintaining control. But his rise was not without consequences. Clashes with rival gangs, such as George "Bugs" Moran's, were constant and bloody. The streets of Chicago were filled with violence, and Capone's reputation as a ruthless gangster began to grow. This made him a famous figure, not only for his life of crime, but also for his social life. One of the most notorious events associated with Capone was the St. Valentine's Day Massacre in 1929. On February 14th of that year, 7 members of a rival gang led by Bugs Moran were lined up and shot to death in a garage in Chicago. Although Capone was never formally charged, it is believed that he ordered the massacre to consolidate his power and eliminate his rivals. This brutal murder was a clear message to other gangsters: no one could challenge his authority. Despite the violence, Capone presented himself to the press as a charitable man, which allowed him to maintain a favorable public image in the eyes of some citizens. This event was a turning point for Capone. The public began to view him not just as a criminal, but as a ruthless killer. Despite his growing infamy, the federal government struggled to find concrete evidence to charge him with his most serious crimes. But the St. Valentine's Day Massacre attracted the attention of the press and the public, which in turn led authorities to step up their efforts to dismantle Capone's empire. Although Capone was responsible for a long list of crimes, the federal government finally caught him for a crime that seemed minor in comparison: tax evasion. In 1931, after years of investigation, Capone was sentenced to 11 years in prison for failing to pay taxes on his vast criminal fortune. He was first sent to the federal prison in Atlanta, but due to the corruption of the guards, who granted him privileges, he was transferred to Alcatraz in 1934. At Alcatraz, Capone lost all the power he once had on the outside. His years of hard living and stress led him to develop serious health problems, including syphilis, which deteriorated both his body and mind. While in Alcatraz, Capone found himself in a hostile environment, far from the luxury and luxuries he was accustomed to. Although he had his own cell and was able to receive visitors, his health continued to decline. In his time in prison, he became an almost tragic figure, looking back on the glory days of his criminal empire while dealing with the cost of his decisions. After serving 7 years of his sentence, Capone was released in 1939 due to poor health. He returned to his mansion in Florida, where he lived in semi-seclusion. His decline was rapid, and by the end of his life, Capone was a shadow of the man he had been. He died on January 25, 1947 at the age of 48, after suffering a stroke and pneumonia. Over the course of his life, Capone amassed a considerable fortune, but in the end, his money could not buy him health or happiness. His mental and physical illness led to a state of decline, and his final years were ones of isolation and regret. Although Capone died more than 70 years ago, his legend as the most famous gangster in American history endures to this day. His life and crimes have been immortalized in books, films, and television series, leaving an indelible mark on popular culture. The figure of Al Capone has been the protagonist of countless cinematic and literary representations. Films such as The Untouchables and series such as Boardwalk Empire have recreated the life of the gangster, but how much of what we see on screen is true? The reality is that most of these representations exaggerate certain aspects or focus on the most dramatic episodes of his life, omitting important details about his character, his mistakes, and his weaknesses. In real life, Capone was more complex than the movies portray. He was a man who wanted to be seen as a benefactor to his community, donating to charitable causes. However, behind this public image, he hid a violent and ruthless criminal leader, willing to do anything to maintain control. Furthermore, it is important to mention how the press contributed to the creation of the myth of Al Capone. His acts, although heinous, were turned into a media spectacle, which, in turn, helped him stay in the public eye. The coverage he received not only humanized Capone, but also turned him into a sort of cultural icon. The case of Al Capone is a reminder of how organized crime can become so powerful that even the strongest authorities have a hard time dealing with it. Despite his influence and power, Capone could not escape the consequences of his actions, and eventually, justice caught up with him. It is interesting to reflect on how Capone became a symbol of crime and corruption in a time when law and order were being challenged. His story is a study in excess and the consequences of living a life of crime. Furthermore, this case teaches us a valuable lesson: even the most powerful criminals can fall for seemingly insignificant mistakes, such as not paying taxes. Capone's story remains relevant because it shows that sooner or later, a person's actions come back to haunt them. If you found this story interesting, don't forget to subscribe to The Secret Case for more content about the most infamous criminals in history. Share this video if you liked it and leave us your comments on what you think of Al Capone and his legacy. Don't forget to activate the bell so you don't miss our next videos. See you next time.